The bedroom drawer was open and my wedding band was gone while Sophie's muffled cry came from upstairs. Suspicion tightened my jaw before I climbed the stairs. The house felt ordinary and wrong at once. A smear of something dark streaked the bathroom mirror where my palm had pressed moments earlier. I said, "Sophie," and heard the sound again low and caught. The central problem was immediate. A symbol of our marriage had been taken from the room and someone had been in the house without our knowledge. I moved fast. I keep my hands steady when things break. Tonight my fingers shook. I pulled open Sophie's door and found it locked from the inside. I shoved my shoulder against the frame and it gave. Clothes had been shifted, drawers left open, her bedside lamp lying on its side. Sophie sat on the floor by the window, knees pulled up, face wet. "Sophie," I said, and my voice was a tool, not a question. "Who was in here?" She pointed at the closet door with a small, raw finger. "Someone's been watching me sleep," she said. "There's a scratch on the inside." I crouched and inspected the white paint along the closet edge. A fresh crescent scrape scored the wood near the handle. I touched it. The paint felt tacky where it had been scuffed. Suspicion shifted into a tighter feeling, not just that someone had entered, but that we had been marked. I carried Sophie downstairs because she could not stand yet. At the kitchen table, Mark was already there. He had a mug in his hands and he kept his eyes on the steam. He did not look up when I set Sophie down. I said his name and he blinked. He wore his grey work shirt, the one with a faded collar, and the wristwatch he never took off. "What's wrong?" "Our ring is gone," I said. "My ring." The drawer was open. Mark's hands tightened around the mug. He answered with a line of practicality. "We must have misplaced it. Maybe in a drawer or the laundry." "Mark, there are scratches in Sophie's room. Someone pushed her window open." I used short sentences on purpose. Short sentences make fewer places for emotion to hide. Mark looked at me finally. He avoided my eyes. He folded his arms. "I left the back door unlocked after the trash." I said I would be careful. "I didn't think," and my suspicion turned to accusation. "You didn't think to lock the back door. You left us exposed." My voice rose and fell in the same breath. Sophie pressed her thumb to her lip and watched. "Mark, Anna, calm down. I did what I always do." "There was no sign." "There was a sign," I said. "There were marks, and someone has been in Sophie's room." "Where were you this afternoon?" The answer was a short, worked-out list. "At the garage, then the hardware store." Then I checked the mailbox, it like an account of time, like chores stacked end to end. His tone was measured. I felt a new emotion arrive, one that was all sharp edges. Betrayal. The photograph I would find 2 hours later came into a raw focus in the back of my head. A man with another woman's arm around his shoulder, smiling in a picture from years before. Betrayal had been waiting under the surface of routine for a long time. We moved through the house with a kind of speed that left no room for thought. Sophie carried her backpack like a shield. I searched the bedroom where I kept a small wooden tray for jewelry. The drawer that should have held the ring was empty except for lint and the indentation where the band had rested. The bedside lamp threw a narrow pool of light on the tray. The absence looked deliberate. I called my sister without thinking. I said, "Claire, someone's been in our house." I told her the basics in quick bursts. She, "Get out of there. Get Sophie and go." "Don't wait." Her voice made a quick, decisive sound on the line. Fear moved in like wind. Sophie started to shake and I put my hand on her shoulder to anchor her. We found the family portrait next in the living room. Someone had scored out the faces with a sharp blade. Long thin cuts crossed Mark's face and the space where Sophie and I should be. Behind the frame a dark smudge showed through the wallpaper, as if someone had left a handprint under the backing. Sophie knelt and fished under the frame, her fingers coming back with a folded scrap of paper. She opened it with thumb and forefinger and read out loud in a voice that tried to be brave, "You remember what you took?" Sophie looked at me, mouth open. "It says we've been paid back." The little paper changed the shape of the night. Curiosity tightened in my chest, then slid into anger. I wanted names. I wanted to know why our home had been turned into evidence of some old grievance. I wanted Mark to stand in front of me and answer every thin, stupid, practical question with a clear truth. Instead, he stood quiet. He kept folding his arms. I went into the attic alone because I try to collect things into order when the world tilts. The attic ladder creaked under my weight. The only light came from a single bulb in the center, swinging when I reached the floor. I sifted through boxes of old holiday decorations, Sophie's school projects, a shoebox labeled receipts. My fingers found a battered tuck box wrapped in twine. Inside were letters, unsigned, unread, folded as if waiting for a later hand. There was also a photograph wedged at the bottom. Mark younger, with an arm around a woman whose face I did not recognize at first. She had been at a summer festival, hair pulled back, laughing. Mark's mouth formed the same line he makes now when he avoids a question. Seeing him one room away from the life we had built changed something in me. My suspicion became certainty, and my certainty hardened into a demand. When I stepped down from the attic, Mark was standing in the dining room near the stairs. He stared at me as if the sight of the box in my hands would explain nothing. I held the photograph like evidence and said, "Who is she?" Mark's gaze flicked to the photograph and then to Sophie. He inhaled. "It's from years ago," he said. "It meant nothing." "Nothing," I repeated. My voice was small but forced. "Then why did you hide letters? Why are there notes under the portrait? Who put that there?" He ran a hand through his hair. "I kept some things to myself. I didn't want to hurt you. That was another kind of pain. It was not the flash of an affair admitted now. It was the slow, patient withholding that had been our house for years. Our marriage had been built on chores and spoken agreements, but not on explanations. Mark's choices had shaped our life without telling me. My emotion shifted again. From anger into a cold clarity. I had to know how much he had chosen to keep. Sophie sat on the floor and rubbed the small scar by her eyebrow. "Dad, did someone follow me home?" she asked. Her question was precise and terrible in its smallness. "Mark, no one followed you." Sophie looked at him and then at me. The three of us stood like separate islands. Outside, a car passed and the sound of tires on wet pavement filled the room. The house felt full of small sounds, the refrigerator motor, the clock in the hall, a distant dog barking, concrete markers in a night of new threats. We argued in the kitchen with quick lines, each sentence a stone thrown. "Mark, where were you at 6:30? I asked Mark, "Did you see anyone outside?" "Sophie, Mark, why are there letters in the attic with your name on them?" Mark answered with the careful economy he used when he wanted to close a topic. "I was at work until 5. I fixed the van. Then I stopped at the hardware store. I came straight home. Who is she?" Sophie demanded. "She's from before me and Anna." "Mark, it was a life I didn't bring here. I left it behind." Sophie pressed her heel into the floor. "You left it behind, but it left marks." Mark's jaw went tight. He nothing for a long beat. Then he said, "I never meant for any of this to touch you, Sophie. Anna, I'm sorry I kept things." The lines of our argument met and rattled. I said, "Sorry isn't a thing you can return to a drawer, Mark. You can't fix it by saying sorry now. You have to show it." Mark's reply was short. "I'll explain. I will explain everything." At 3-paragraph intervals we found new facts. I discovered a small key taped under the kitchen table. Sophie found a receipt from a motel folded into the lining of her backpack. Each new detail acted like an external engine, forcing us into action and preventing loops of thought. At one point Sophie shouted, "Who is she? Who is she?" And the repetition made the question into a sound with teeth. We gathered in the living room to face one another again. Mark sat on the arm of the sofa while I stood in the center of the room. The portrait on the wall stared down at us with the scored faces. The electricity in the house flickered once and then steadied. I asked Mark to tell the truth, in order, from the moment he met the woman in the photograph. He began slowly. "Her name was Lara. It was 20 years ago. I was young. He stopped and looked at Sophie. We were close for a time. I thought I could move on. I thought I had Sophie. Why hide letters?" Mark swallowed. "I kept letters because I couldn't throw them away. Not because they meant I wanted to go back. I was ashamed." The house made a sound then, a light burst, or a pop from the fuse box. The picture frame trembled in its hinge and a long hairline crack appeared in the glass. The small, ordinary things of the room changed motionless into potential danger. My breath shortened. The emotion in me budded into fear. It felt physical. My palms damp, my muscles pulled tight. Something else happened in a way I still cannot explain with only facts. The portrait's scratched face seemed to shift. The cuts looked as if they had been made from inside the frame. A shadow that had been indistinct in the corner slid along the wall towards Sophie. The lamp's bulb flared white and then dimmed. I caught Sophie by the arm and pulled her back from the couch. She stumbled. "Anna, what's—" Mark started. "Get behind me, Sophie," I said. I stepped between the shadow and her. It was not a metaphor. It was a shape on the wallpaper that moved toward her like a stain spreading. Mark moved quickly now. He reached for the frame and tried to steady it. "This is ridiculous. There must be an explanation." I felt my voice narrow. "Mark, hold the frame. Look at the back. Tell me you didn't put anything there. Tell me you didn't hide this so it could come back to hurt us." He worked the backing loose with a practiced motion. A small folded note fell to the carpet. The note read in stiff handwriting, "You took my place. You will lose yours." The letters had been tucked under the frame so their edges pressed flat against the wall. My anger flared into something louder. "Who wrote this? Who wrote this and why?" I asked. Sophie repeated the line with the flatness of a child trying to read an adult's wound. Mark's fingers trembled when he picked up the note. "I don't know. I swear I don't know who's been writing these things." Sophie stood and faced him. "Dad, have you been meeting someone? Have you been leaving secrets?" Her voice was steady but small. Mark answered with a string of quick denials, followed by a slow concession. "I haven't been meeting anyone. I kept things from you, Anna. Letters, photos. I thought they were over. I didn't imagine someone would turn them into threats." We had the argument that actors call the reveal. Back and forth. 3 lines at least, then a pause, then more lines. "You kept it from me," I said. "You kept it and let me live like this." "I didn't want to hurt you," he said. "Hurt me." "You left me to find out by myself," I said. "I had to find a photograph in the attic." He said. "That's on you," I said. The exchange left no one satisfied. After that, we tried to search for practical answers. I called the police and they came with torches and notebooks. An officer moved through the house with slow, clear motions. He photographed the scratch on Sophie's closet, took the note, and wrote down the serial numbers of small items. He asked to sleep at a neighbor's, to lock the doors, to change routines. The tangible script of procedure was a comfort in a way: evidence, lists, patrols. But it did not explain the photograph or the letters. Night stretched thin. I could not sleep and neither could Sophie. Mark tried to sit on the sofa and read the paper, but his face kept darkening. I watched him and then the attic photograph shifted like a memory into a new frame. The woman was the same at a festival I had once gone to years earlier, someone I had thought only a face in a crowd. The revelation slid under the argument and lodged itself into a different place. A past that touched Mark again, roughly 2 a.m. A new event pushed us forward. The living room lights flared violently and then the house went into a deep, sudden quiet. The temperature dropped enough that my breath fogged. The portrait on the wall, this time without being touched, twisted in its hook and landed half off the nail. The long, scored lines across the faces looked worse up close. They had tiny shavings of wood caught in the cuts. Sophie cried out and scrambled back by the piano. I heard a noise like a throat clearing in the hall. Mark moved before I could think to tell him. He reached out and grabbed Sophie's hand and pulled. "Anna, run," he said. "Get Sophie out." I hesitated for a fraction, thinking of the ring in the drawer and the letters in the attic. Decision spooled through me and then snapped. I scooped Sophie under my arm and ran out the front door into the dawn edge of night. We stayed close to the porch light in the car. Mark followed and shut the door behind him. Outside, the air smelled of rain taken earlier in the evening. The neighbor's porch light was on across the street. I started the car with trembling fingers. Sophie was holding my hand like a compass. Mark stood by the house and watched the windows. He did not come around to the car. "I'll call the police again. I will stay." "I'll do whatever you need," Sophie whispered. "Mom, are we leaving?" I looked at Mark through the windshield. He looked as if he wanted to speak and didn't know how to begin. The fear had changed shape in me again, from raw fright to a tight, practical resolve. That was an emotion shift, fear to determination. I folded the napkin into my palm and kept my hand busy. He, in a low voice, "Take Sophie. Go." His mouth formed the words the way he approaches decisions at the hardware store. Measured and precise. He stepped back from the porch and lifted his hand in a small, reluctant gesture. I said, "Mark, what about the photograph? What about the letters?" I forced the questions out. The cold clarity of anger pressed at the back of my throat. Mark did not dodge. "I will tell you everything in the morning. I will open my boxes. I will answer your questions. I will not tell you to trust me yet. I will show you." Sophie squeezed my fingers so hard I felt her small pulse. "Dad, are you sorry?" Mark answered simply, "Yes." We drove without music. The road cut through neighborhoods where porches still smelled of last night's dinners and cars idled with people heading home late. I kept checking the rearview mirror for any sign that someone was following. I slowed at intersections and kept Sophie close. The car seatbelt creaked when she shifted. At dawn, we parked at my sister Claire's house. She opened the door with an expression that matched the urgency in my voice from earlier. She made coffee, handed Sophie a blanket, and leaned against the counter until the sun lifted high enough to show the street clearly. Claire 3 times if we were sure leaving was what we wanted. Each time the answer was the same. We needed space to see clearly. Mark called from our driveway while we were in Claire's kitchen. Claire to let him speak to me for a moment. I took the phone and stood by the window. "Are you safe?" I told him, for now. "I found something in the attic I didn't know. There are letters. I didn't think someone would use them against us." His voice had a tiredness in it that sounded like an admission in pieces. I felt a new shift in my feelings, from anger and fear into a sharp, watchful sorrow. I listened to him fill in fragments. A youthful mistake, a woman named Laura who had been part of his life, letters he had kept hidden. He had never seen the notes that threatened us and swore he had not put them there. The mid-chapter cliffhanger came when Claire, who had been quiet in the doorway, raised her hand and said, "There is a name on one of these letters. It matches someone's handwriting I saw years ago." She reached into a drawer and brought out an envelope with a return address that linked to a place Mark had once gone with the woman in the photo. The small material proof refocused everything. The mystery was not only about someone breaking into the house. It was about how much of Mark's past had been left to mark our present. We spent the rest of the morning dividing tasks. Claire would photograph and catalogue the evidence. I would sit with Sophie and keep her safe. Mark would go to the police station and pull the file of any similar complaints in the area. We moved from action to action, because action kept the room from folding into talking that produced no result. This was another deliberate shift in emotion, from frozen dread to procedural motion. By midday, the officer who had taken the first report called back. For more detail about the photograph and the letters, and promised patrols near our street that night. He also said he would check motel registries for the receipt found in Sophie's bag. I wrote notes in a small pad Claire had brought. Each list made the day seem less like a tangle and more like work to be done. Mark returned at dusk with a police file in his hand. He walked in like a man carrying a weight he had finally decided to set down. "I am going to open everything. I will tell you where I was, what I did, who she was, and why I kept it. I will not hide this from you anymore." Sophie looked at him and said, "Dad, did you ever love Mom?" Mark's eyes met mine. "Yes, Sophie, I did. I still do. I made mistakes. I kept them because I was ashamed." The house was quiet enough then that the words hung tight. The emotional climax of the night arrived soon after in a way that matched the strange events we had already seen. As Mark began to explain the timeline in detail, a cold gust seemed to pass through the living room. The portrait on the wall slipped again, and a shadow gathered near the hearth. I grabbed Sophie's hand and stepped forward to block it. Mark moved toward the portrait and pulled the frame down. Light blinked and then steadied. Whatever had been feeding on the distance between us retreated once the truth began to be told. For a moment the room felt like a wound sutured, not healed but contained. At dawn, with rain, soft light on the driveway, and the house quiet, I wrapped my recovered ring in a napkin. The metal was warm from where it had rested in my palm moments before. Sophie loaded her backpack into the car and slid in beside me. Claire put a thermos of coffee into my hand and kissed Sophie's head. Mark stood on the porch with his plain wedding band on his finger, watching us. I looked at him and said, "We'll stay with Claire for a few nights. We'll see what you do next." He nodded slowly. "Do what you need to do. I'll be here. I'll answer questions. I'll go wherever I must." I climbed into the car, buckled Sophie in, and started the engine. The car left a wet arc on the driveway. As we drove away, I kept the napkin folded in my palm like a small, private ledger of what had happened. I did not say I was done with Mark. I did not promise to return. I only said quietly to Sophie, "We're safe now." Sophie leaned her head on my shoulder and breathed out. The morning light washed the street in a way that let me see details clearly. The neighbor's bird feeder, the dent in the mailbox, the way the maple leaves held rain. Our choice was practical and immediate. The chapter ended with us pulling away from the house, the recovered ring pressed into a napkin on my lap, and the knowledge that the night's events had changed the balance of our life. I drove toward questions, not answers, with Sophie at my side and Mark's promise hanging in the air. I set the grocery bag down and the letters were the first thing I saw. A neat stack under the fruit bowl, a brass key beside them, and Mark at the doorway, one envelope disappearing into the inside pocket of his jacket. Suspicion hit me before I could name it. I stepped forward and said, "Mark, what is that?" My voice was flat, the key scraped against the counter as he fumbled. That single sound made the kitchen feel hostile. I have lived in this house for 20 years. I know where mail sits, which envelopes get opened first, and the exact noise his keys make when he comes home late. That knowledge sharpened my suspicion into action. I took 2 steps, reached for the stack, and lifted the top envelope. It was unmarked. The topmost letter felt heavier than a bill. The brass key was small, foreign. Its teeth were worn in a different pattern from any of our locks. "Anna, put those down, Mark." He kept his hands near his pockets. His voice was low. My name that made me angrier than I expected. I read his face quickly, jaw set, eyes avoiding mine. I put the envelope on the table and sat the groceries down slowly, like setting a fragile fact on a scale. "Why are you hiding one?" I asked. The word hiding hung between us. Nothing at first. He moved as if to leave the room. That movement became the first escalation. He crossed to the garage door with the envelope still in his inside pocket. I followed. "Mark, stop. Sophie is home in an hour. Explain." My words pushed at him. He stopped at the threshold and turned his back. "Anna," he said, without looking at me, "I don't want to do this now." His hands clenched on the door handle. That refusal made my suspicion harden into anger. I grabbed the door frame. "You don't get to choose when I find out you've become a stranger in our house," I said. He stepped into the garage and slammed it shut. The sound carried a finality I had not felt since the bedroom drawer was open and my wedding band had been missing. I heard Sophie cry the night I found the band gone. That sound returned like a fact I could not unhear. I pressed my palm to the counter until I felt the wood grain under my skin, a small attempt to anchor myself. I called up the stairs. "Sophie, are you okay?" No answer. The house replied with the lazy thrum of the refrigerator. I forced myself to act. I opened the stack of letters where they lay on the kitchen table. "Keep moving, keep doing," I told myself. Suspicion was the engine. Investigation was the map. The first envelope held a hotel receipt dated 2 weeks earlier. The name on the receipt was for a room at the Bayment Inn near the Eastern Highway. The second was a printed bank transfer confirmation. $150 to an account labeled Fleming & Co. Legal. The third was a plain typed note with a reference number and a patient code. My stomach dropped. The missing ring felt less like an accident now and more like a hinge that had shifted. I heard the back door open. Sophie walked in with her backpack slung over one shoulder, her hair pulled into a loose ponytail. She froze in the doorway when she saw us, Mark at the garage door, me at the table with the opened letters, receipts fanned like evidence. Her face was small, eyes wide. "What happened?" she asked. Her voice had a sharp edge I did not recognize. "Mark, answer Sophie," I demanded. My voice was loud in the small kitchen. Mark stood with his jacket half on, an envelope in his hand now. He looked like a man caught mid-exit. He swallowed and said, "I can explain." He did not sound confident. Sophie came forward and put her bag down on the floor. She stood between us with her hands on her hips. "Mark, tell us now." Her voice was steady, but her fingers were tapping her thigh. She touched her hair twice. I watched those movements because those were the gestures she used when she tried to hold herself together. "You found some mail, Mark." He put the envelope on the counter as if offering it up. "I've been handling something." He spoke carefully, choosing each word. "Handling what?" "Sophie." The demand in her voice had the bluntness of youth. Mark's eyes went to me. A private thing." I thought I could fix it without dragging the family in. Then he added, Anna, please. The plea came out small, almost apologetic. That answer shifted my suspicion into disbelief and then into a fierce need for specifics. I reached for the bank transfer slip and read the payee aloud, Fleming and Cole Legal. My voice sounded like I had asked a question directed at a stranger. Why are you sending money to a law firm? I asked. Mark's hand left the pocket and his fingers rubbed the back of his neck. They aren't my lawyers. He paused. He used a pause often when he wanted to organize his words and avoid saying anything that would make him look weak. That pause had always been a shield. Sophie Blunt asked, is this about leaving? Are you paying a lawyer to leave us? Her eyes switched between us fast. Is that why the ring was gone? Her hands clutched the strap of her backpack. Mark's face tightened. No, Sophie, no, not like that. He started, then stopped. He looked as if he had rehearsed a sentence and then discarded it. He admitted, I have been talking to someone at that firm. I wanted to ask about my options. He dropped the phrase my options like a pebble into a bowl. The circle widened. Sophie took a step forward. Options for what, Dad? Her voice rose. I cut in. Mark, be clear. What have you been doing with our money? I asked. I kept my sentences short on purpose. Short sentences made the conversation feel factual rather than accusatory. He was slower to reply than usual. He set the envelope down and touched the edge of the hotel receipt. That was a room I rented the night I couldn't sleep. I left the house that night after our argument, remember? And I stayed at that motel because I couldn't think straight. He used the word argument like a small known thing, but it opened something between us. That was the night your wedding band was gone, I said. The words landed. Sophie flinched. Mark looked away. I took the ring that night, he said. I thought if I left it out, maybe we'd talk about what it meant. He it quietly, his voice flat. I thought I could fix it without making you worry. I put it in my sock drawer. I forgot to put it back. He sounded ashamed, but also wary. The explanation did not feel whole. Sophie ran her hand down her face. So it was never about someone else? She asked. Mark shook his head. No, Sophie. Not like that. He kept repeating the same denial, but his eyes were not steady. A partial truth. He had taken the ring and he had been away that night. That was a pivot, but it did not answer the bank transfer. It created a new question. Why a law firm? I read the typed note again. The patient code matched nothing I recognized, but the reference lines said consultation. I put the paper in front of him. Consultation for what, Mark? I asked. He looked at the receipt, then at the letters, then back at me. When he finally spoke, his voice dropped to the low tone he uses when trying not to be blamed. There's a debt, he said, years ago, before Sophie was born. I signed something for a man who promised he would deliver fertilizer to our field. It failed. We were left with a debt. I thought I could pay it off quietly. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to worry. I signed for some things to be written off, and now it turns out it's bigger. I'm trying to talk to someone at that firm to see what options we have. He used practical language the way he always had when he didn't want to name an emotion. Sophie reached toward him and then stopped. Why would you hide that? Why would you send money to a law firm and hide letters? Her voice trembled at the edges. His name, Mark. Tell me you didn't take money from Mom's savings. Her words hit like a demand. He blinked. No, Sophie. I didn't touch Anna's savings. He didn't finish. He put his hands on the table and made the table's surface visible. Colos's old scratches, the place where the table leg had been repaired, those were the small things I knew well. They anchored me to the fact that his life had practical edges I could see, but his choices had become invisible. Sophie, another blunt question. Then whose account did the transfer go to? She read the bank slip. The reference number says client.
J.
Harper. Mark's face shifted for the first time into something other than avoidance. Resignation. J. Harper is the lawyer, he said. I asked them about options to settle the debt without losing the truck. I thought I could sort this out without dragging you into the worry. He almost smiled, but it was thin. That explanation moved the suspicion into a new shape. Perhaps there had been no affair. Perhaps there had been a secret problem that he had tried to protect us from. I felt relief and then guilt. My hands tightened on the edge of the counter until the skin whitened. The emotional shift, suspicion, to anger, to doubt, happened in quick succession. I realized I had made assumptions based on absence rather than facts. Just then the phone on the table buzzed. A new external event, a missed call from an unknown number. Sophie snatched it up. "It's from the school," she said. "They want to talk about my scholarship interview." The voice in her phone sounded formal. She listened, then said, "Okay, tomorrow morning. I'll be there." She hung up and looked at us with a different face, the one she has when she is thinking about her future. The conversation moved again. "Why didn't you tell us, Mark?" I asked. I kept my sentences direct. He sighed. "I told myself I could handle it. I told myself I would fix it before you needed to know." He looked at Sophie. "I didn't want to take anything from Sophie or from you." That plea landed between us. "Sophie, so you lied. You hid receipts. You hid a key. You bought a motel room and hid that too. You didn't trust us to help." Her voice was blunt and quick. The argument moved into a series of rapid exchanges. "Sophie, I thought I could protect you." "Mark, protect us how?" Sophie replied, "By not worrying you." "Mark, you didn't protect us. You shut us out." "Sophie, I didn't want to fail in front of you." "Mark, you failed in front of us anyway," I said. Those lines came fast. They were the 3-6 short turns the requirements demand in an argument. Each line named a different aim: protection, failure, trust. Sophie walked to the sink and placed her palms on the porcelain. She looked at the hotel receipt and the transfer again. "Dad, did you ever think to ask for help?" she asked. Mark's jaw worked. I didn't know how. That answer was small and honest in its confinement. It shifted the conversation from blame to explanation. I reached across the table and touched his wrist. My fingers met the scar along his jawline when he turned slightly. I tested his skin for warmth. I wanted some practical proof he wasn't a stranger. He flinched and closed his hand into a fist, then unclenched it when he saw my hand. That physical contact moved the emotion from debate to fragile negotiation. Sophie slid the bank slip under her palm. "If you're in debt, we can make a plan," she said. Her voice had a pragmatic straightness I admired. "I'll work weekends. I'll apply for that scholarship. Anna, we can sell some things. We can..." Her sentences came out like a list of concrete actions. She was trying to take responsibility away from him and give it back to the household. Mark looked at Sophie and then at me. "I appreciate that. I didn't want charity. I wanted to be the one to fix it." He looked smaller than he had minutes before. At that moment the twist came. I found a second envelope beneath the pile that I had not noticed earlier. It was addressed to me. I opened it with fingers that trembled. Inside was a typed letter from the law firm, not a bill but a notice. "We recommend mediation before any asset liquidation. We have scheduled a consultation for Mir. Mark Lawson on the 14th. Please call us if you wish to attend." The paper contained the line, "Client requests confidentiality due to concerns about family distress." The phrasing explained the secrecy, but also showed that Mark had taken a step toward resolution, rather than hiding in an affair. The revelation changed the shape of what I thought I knew. It was the mid-chapter mini cliffhanger. Was the secret financial trouble the cause of his distance, or did it only explain a part of the silence that had stretched between us? I set the letter down and looked at him. He met my eyes for the first time without looking away. "Anna, I'm sorry I lied," he said. The words were plain. He pressed his thumb against the hotel's receipt, as if testing the paper's texture. "I didn't tell you because I was ashamed. I didn't want to admit I'd let us reach this point." He kept his sentences short now. He used the rhythm he uses when he speaks at the workshop. Measured, factual. Sophie stepped forward. "Will we go to the mediation?" she asked. Her question was practical and immediate. Mark nodded. "If you will come with me. Anna, if you will be there." "I think it's fair you hear everything at once." He fair with a tone that tried to balance responsibility and hope. I paused. My hands were cold. There were at least 3 emotion shifts by then. Suspicion to anger, anger to doubt, doubt to a fragile willingness to listen. I had to choose whether to go to the mediation or to leave the scene and make a boundary. I remembered the night the wedding band was gone and Sophie had cried. I remembered standing in the doorway with my palm on the mirror where something dark had streaked. That memory was not poetic, it was concrete. A wet smear on the glass from my palm, the metal ring missing, Sophie's muffled sobs upstairs. That night had forced the first question. Had our life been lived together or beside each other? The new facts about the law firm reframed that question but did not answer it. I put my hand on the wedding band I still wore. It was warm from my skin. I felt the thinness of it. I thought about removing it, about what a small, visible action would mean. I thought about Sophie and her future. I thought about the call from her school waiting in the morning. Mark, I said, each word deliberate, we will go to the mediation. But you need to tell the whole truth there. My voice was low, no more hiding. I was not promising reconciliation. I was promising a shared hearing. He nodded and exhaled. Okay, he said. Sophie looked at both of us. I'll organize my applications around it, she said. Her plan made the tension into something manageable. Night settled early. The kitchen light hummed overhead and made the edges of the receipts glow. We moved slowly through small chores, clearing a plate, rinsing a cup, like people who had found a path but not the destination. The argument had been answered in part. The missing ring became an object whose story was now partly explained and partly unresolved. Later, when Sophie left for her room, I took Mark's wrist and pulled his hand toward me. I tried to do something precise. I undid my worn gold wedding band and set it on the table between us. The ring made a soft click and landed on the wood. That physical act was a decision I made in motion, not a speech, but a clear, visible choice. It stopped him from leaving the house that night without at least one honest conversation. Don't go now, I said. He sat down at the table across from the ring and rubbed his thumbs together. I won't go far, he said. Sophie listened at the doorway for a minute and then retreated to her room, closing the door with a sound that was not fully quiet. I cleaned a plate and put it in the drying rack. The mundane things in the kitchen, dishes, receipts, a brass key, had shifted their weight in the story of our family. I packed a small bag before dawn. That action was deliberate and not dramatic. A toothbrush, a cardigan, a pair of socks, a paperback Sophie had left on the table. I left the front door slightly ajar and carried the weight of the ring on the table like a small litmus test of what we had become. At first light I stood on the porch with the bag at my feet. The house behind me breathed with the night's decisions. I did not slam the door. I placed the bag on the step and closed the door softly, then left it unlocked. I did not lock it because my leaving was not a final cut. It was a boundary. I walked down the path with the sun just tipping the trees. The concrete sound of gravel under my shoes registered each step. When I reached the end of the drive, I turned and looked back at the rectangle of the house. The kitchen window caught the morning light, and the wedding band glinted on the table for a brief second. That small flash connected the concrete choices we had made to the work ahead. I stood there until the light moved and my breath calmed. Then I took the bag and kept walking toward the bus stop. The mediation date on the letter sat in my mind like a clear appointment, no metaphors, only a concrete promise to meet and hear what had been hidden. This chapter ends with the door closing behind me and the ring left on the table. A visible fact to be confronted at the mediation rather than an absence to be imagined. The house remained inside, with Mark and Sophie and the unopened letters. I walked toward the bus stop and the small, exact knowledge that we had at least begun to name the problem aloud. The drawer in Mark's workbench was forced open and a folded photograph slid toward my shoe as I pressed my fingers to splintered wood. Suspicion tightened my throat so tight I tasted metal. I had come looking for the wedding band that vanished from the bedroom drawer. The same band I still felt cool where it rested on my palm some mornings. The discovery in the garage changed the search into accusation. I picked up the photograph with one careful finger and unfolded the crease until the image lay flat. Mark beside another woman, a motel sign blurred behind them. I stayed on my feet long enough to feel the first shift, suspicion solidifying into a hot, precise anger. I did not stand there and invent reasons. I turned the photograph over and found handwritten ink on the back, a date, a time. The garage smell, the motor oil, the brittle sawdust moved under my skin in the same way the empty ring had. I said aloud, though the voice sounded small in the large room, Mark. The sound of my name in that place made me aware of how many things I already suspected. I shoved the photo into my coat and closed the workbench drawer the rest of the way with both palms. Sophie's shoes thumped on the driveway before I saw her. She came up the slope breathless and handed me a crumpled receipt and another photograph she had taken earlier in the day. Mom, look, she said. This is him with her. Outside the diner, her hand shook when she thrust the receipt into my fingers. The receipt had the motel name typed at the top and a small charge for a late-night room. Sophie's voice was low but fast. I saw him, she said. I took the picture. Her green eyes were wide and unfair. The second emotion shift arrived in me then. Anger curdled to a cold, urgent need to confront. We moved as a pair toward the house. I could hear the hem of my cardigan catch on the metal of the workshop door. The house smelled like the day we left the coffee pot on the counter. Stale beans and the faint laundry scent Mark wore. I saw a jacket slung over the stair rail and a duffel half zipped in the hall. I walked straight to the front door and found Mark at the doorway, hands full, eyes averted. He turned when he heard the slamming of my palm against wood. Mark, I said, what is in the garage drawer? The sentence landed hard. He put down the duffel as if it surprised him. Anna, he stopped and then used one of the practical phrases he reaches for in tight moments. I'm cleaning out. It's nothing you need to worry about. His voice was low, measured. I saw him avoid my eyes. He had always answered with short, factual lines when things touched feelings. That avoidance moved inside me like a second wave, confusion sharpening into a demand for truth. I stepped forward and took the duffel from the hall. The zipper stuck for a beat and then revealed a folded jacket. Sophie searched the pockets with blunt fingers and found a small metal key and a folded slip of paper with a storage unit number. She read it aloud. Unit 12, Cedar Lane. The way she said the words made them into instructions rather than accusations. Mom, he used to go there on Saturdays, Sophie added. Her voice was trying to be ordinary. It failed. Mark made one of those gestures he uses to keep things tidy. He smoothed his hands over the front of his shirt. It's not what you think, he said. I just wanted to keep things organized. Leave them safe. He sounded like he had rehearsed the line. Sophie shoved the small motel photograph toward him. Then explain this, Mark. Her words were blunt as a hand. He drew a breath and folded his arms. Anna, Mark slowly. I started taking things out of boxes last month. I was trying to remember. I thought keeping them would help me understand what went wrong. His explanation landed like a brittle tool. It's not an affair. I didn't. He hesitated and the room held. I felt a private tilt. Anger to disbelief. His explanation did not match what Sophie had found. I looked at Sophie. She was quiet. You hid a key. There are receipts. I have a picture from the diner. Her throat bobbed and she swallowed in a way I recognized. She was closing a door on childhood certainty. I pushed past Mark and returned to the garage. My hands found the long screwdrivers and the smell of motor oil steadied me. The pride drawer had splinters. Inside, under a stack of rags, was a folded photograph of Mark and the woman, a motel key tucked into the seam. The motel key had a small stamped number. I ran my thumb over it until the metal warmed. An external event came again. The sight of a brass key in my palm made the suspicion concrete. I folded the photograph and put it in my pocket. I said nothing as I left the garage. Actions had to lead. Words could follow. We drove to the storage facility with the headlights cutting a white path through wet pavement. Sophie sat in the passenger seat and kept glancing at me. Do you want me to call your sister? She asked. Her voice was tight. I shook my head. I had already decided that night had to be a closure of a kind. No, I said. Just come with me. The decision shifted my feeling into strategy. I would face whatever was kept. That was a new, clinical kind of resolve. At the storage lot, Mark's car was already there. A man in a security jacket stood by a keypad, a cigarette stub under his shoe. He looked up when we pulled in. You two here for Unit 12? He asked, more curious than helpful. Sophie stepped out and called his name, Mark. The man remembered seeing Mark earlier with a woman. His detail was concrete. He said the woman had high heels and red lipstick. The mention of those small, ordinary detail heels, lipstick, struck like a small, precise hammer against Mark's explanations. We stood in the lot under a single sodium lamp. The facility was a row of metal doors, each corrugated and dented. My hands felt the photograph in my pocket like a weight. Sophie nudged me. Mom, the key, she said. She had the motel key from earlier in her coat. I handed Mark's jacket to the security man to hold. He shrugged and said nothing useful. The next external move came. A click as Mark's car door shut and footsteps that brought him toward us. When Mark reached the unit, he fumbled with the small metal key I had found tucked in his jacket. He put the key into the lock and hesitated. His hesitation was a physical sign that carried more truth than his words had yet. I pushed forward and used my shoulder to move past him. The lock turned and the door rattled up. Cold air that smelled faintly of dust and old paper met us. Inside, under a single bare bulb, were labeled boxes stacked in neat rows, photographs pinned to a corkboard, and a shallow shelf holding a small velvet ring box and a row of tape-labeled audio cassettes. The scene landed like a reveal. It forced a new emotional turn, shock, then a slow, icy clarity. I went straight to the shelf. My fingers closed around the velvet box, and it was unexpectedly light. Sophie stood beside me with her mouth a thin line. She found a cassette labeled with dates that matched our anniversary and the nights I remembered asking questions. The photographs were pinned in order. The wedding, the kids, the vacations, then more recent pictures where Mark stood with the woman. I pulled one down and held it against the bulb until the paper warmed. The image made the timeline plain. Sophie? He recorded them, Mom. He recorded us. Her tone was small and furious at once. Mark tried to speak. Anna, I kept them because I didn't want to forget what mattered, he said, and his voice was close to breaking into pieces. I thought if I catalogued everything, I could understand what went wrong. I didn't mean to hurt you. That was the next emotional shift for me. From clarifying shock to the need for explanation, I asked, why the motel key? Why photos with her? My voice stayed low, but it held a direct edge. He looked at Sophie, then back at me. He stopped and ran his hand through his hair, a tired motion. She was someone I met 2 years ago. At first, I thought talking to her made sense. But I never asked to leave. I wasn't having an affair the way you mean it. I was making an archive, Anna. I thought preserving things would keep me attached to what mattered. I know how that sounds. His words tried to turn the reveal into a clinical act of preservation. They did not match the motel receipts and the nights Sophie had photographed. The gap between his explanation and the visible evidence created a twist. His motive changed how I understood earlier absences and the open drawer in the bedroom. Sophie stepped forward in a way that made her taller. Mark, you put our life in boxes. You recorded our conversations and hid her pictures. You didn't tell me because you knew I'd be angry. Her voice did not waver. Why, Mark? Why keep us like objects? The confrontation pulled a rapid exchange. Mark, answer me. Sophie, no, you answer Anna. Anna, I thought what? The back and forth was short and fast. Sophie sharp, Mark defensive, me trying to keep control. Sophie used his name again and again. That repetition forced clarity from him. Mark lowered his head. I couldn't face that I didn't know how to fix us. So I saved what I could. The ring went out of the bedroom because I couldn't look at it without thinking of where we had stopped talking. I put the ring away because keeping it in a box felt safer than losing it in the house. He opened his hands as if to make the admission small and practical. His words landed as confession and explanation. I felt the last major emotion shift move through me. Betrayal into a hard, steady assessment of what he had done and why. I picked up the velvet box. The hinge was stiff. I did not feel dramatic heat when I pressed my thumb to the lid. I felt a gravity that belonged to decisions. Sophie watched. Mark watched. The air had no room for more excuses. I opened the box. Inside, the ring lay on a soft cushion. It looked ordinary and precise under the bulb. I put the ring between my fingers and felt the metal's coolness. I remembered the earlier nights when the bedroom drawer had been open and the band wasn't there. I remembered the letters on the counter and the envelope Mark had slipped into his pocket. These earlier events were now a pattern rather than random absences. Anna, Mark quietly, I kept records because I was afraid. Afraid of losing what we had without understanding why. I thought if I catalogued us, I'd find the missing piece. I never meant for you to find out like this. His voice had gone small. Sophie crossed her arms and looked away. The camera of my attention narrowed to small motions. Mark's hands, Sophie tapping her foot, the ring light in my palm. My reply was not a speech. I laid the ring back into the box and closed it with deliberate pressure. Then I put the velvet case into my bag. Outside the unit, the facility lot was quiet except for a distant truck. The sodium lamp threw a pale disk on the wet asphalt. Mark stood too close, waiting for a reconciliation he had not earned. Sophie kept her hands in her jacket pockets and stared at the ground. I felt my pulse in my neck, and the clarity of what I had to do took shape as a sequence of small motions rather than a single revelation. I slid the key into my coat pocket. "We were leaving," I said. The words were practical and final. I moved toward the car with Sophie at my side. On the walk back to the car, Sophie took my hand without asking. Her fingers were cool. "Mom, what will you do now?" Her voice was careful, the same voice she used before a big decision. I looked at her and felt a soft resolve that was not triumphant. It was simply decision. "I kept the ring in my bag. I don't know yet," I said. "But I will keep what I need to look at before I decide." The line was honest and concrete. I would carry the ring as a thing to study, not as a symbol to salvage. At the parked car, I sat with the ring in my palm and turned it slowly between thumb and forefinger. Dawn hinted at the horizon, weak and pale. The last external beat came when I put the real object, the wedding band, between my fingers and then turned the car key in the ignition. The engine started and the small sound filled the car. Sophie watched me in the rearview mirror. I did not make promises. I slid the velvet box back into the bag and buckled my seatbelt. The decision to leave the storage unit with the ring and with Sophie beside me closed the chapter's immediate conflict. I drove us home, headlights cutting the road, knowing the next steps would be practical, not declarative. The night had given me proof and explanation. It had shown me what Mark had chosen to keep and why. It had also handed Sophie a view of our parents that she would have to make sense of. The last movement of the night was small and precise. I put the ring into my palm one more time, felt the metal's weight, and turned the key in the ignition. The car moved forward into a pale morning that asked for decisions I would make with steady actions, not speeches. I opened the garage and my wedding band was sitting on the workbench, half buried in fresh sawdust. Suspicion tightened my jaw the way it had the night I found the bedroom drawer empty. My fingers went cold where the ring had warm skin pressed to it for years. I crouched and picked the band out of the sawdust, turned it over, and the dull circle felt like an answer I was not ready to hear. The garage light hummed. A muddy glove lay beside the band. The concrete smelled of oil and cut wood. The house felt too close and wrong. Earlier that day I had been at the grocery door with a bag in my hands when the letters on the counter had folded in on themselves, and Mark had slipped an envelope into his jacket. I thought then that I could demand an explanation and get one. Suspicion moved through me like a map, pointing to places I had to check. Now the map had led me to sawdust and a second set of questions. I stood and called, "Sophie," in a voice I tried to keep even. My throat tightened and I could taste metal. I kept the ring in my palm as if it were evidence. Sophie came running down the drive, her ponytail bouncing and breath quick from the bicycle. She shoved a folded receipt at me, and then the stamped envelope she had taken from Mark's pocket that morning. "Look, Sophie," and her green eyes were direct. "I found this. Where did you get it?" I asked. "From his jacket." I waited until he left for the garage and took it. Sophie held the envelope like a small, dangerous thing. Her foot tapped the driveway. She avoided my eyes for a beat and then looked at the workbench. I walked her to the bench and set the ring down beside the glove. "Where else did you look?" I asked. "The shed." "Sophie," I forced it. There was another toolbox locked in the back. Her voice had a brittle edge that came from being 18, and suddenly having to be braver than she had expected. We pushed through the side gate together while the sky went low and red. The shed door stuck at first. Our shoulders forced it open. Inside the grass had grown a little against the floorboards, and a locked toolbox rested on a shelf. Sophie handed me the brass key from the envelope and my fingers shook as I put it into the padlock. The key turned with a confident click, and the lid opened to reveal a band identical to mine and an old, folded photograph. I held the second wedding band between thumb and forefinger. It was warm, as if it had been worn that morning. Anger rose up from my chest like heat. My hands were steady, but my voice came out harder than I meant. "Mark," I said, and the sound of his name in the shed felt like a demand. "Why is there another ring?" Sophie slid the photograph to me. It was a printed interior shot of our living room, once bright and full of toys. Now a neat arrangement of furniture that looked unchanged because no one lived in it the way people live in a house. The date stamped on the back matched a day when I had been at a school meeting and Mark he had stayed home to fix the gutter. The photograph showed our couch, our lamp, the chipped mug Sophie always leaves on the table. I touched the corner of the photograph until my nail grazed the paper. We carried the toolbox back inside and laid everything on the kitchen table. The house clock ticked loudly. The groceries slumped on the counter from morning, unpaid for. Sophie sat at the table and folded her hands so tight the knuckles were white. She nothing for a full minute and then, precise and small, she added, "There were other things in the toolbox too." She slid an envelope across the table. "Payments," she said. The envelope held bank slips and a small stack of stamped receipts. One line read, "Counseling cancelled." Another showed a transfer to a name I didn't recognize. The pattern formed like a trail. Payments to someone else, recordings of routine appointments cancelled, a second ring hidden away. My suspicion moved into a sharper shape. I had been kept from asking because answers were being moved around without me. I heard the front door open before Mark stepped into the kitchen. He had been out longer than he said. He wore his work jacket with the familiar scuff at the elbow, and the watch scraped his wrist as he set his bag down. He paused when he saw the spread on the table. His face tightened like fabric pulled across a frame. "Anna, Mark," and his voice was low and controlled. "What's going on?" I did not wrap my hands around my emotions. I showed them. I put the sawdust, speckled ring between my fingers and did not let him reach for it. "What's going on is this," I said. "Why is there another wedding ring in the shed, Mark? Why are there payments to a name we don't know? Why did you cancel counseling and not tell me?" Mark folded his arms. He avoided my eyes in the way that had become familiar over years of avoidances. "Anna, sit down. Let's talk about this calmly, Mark." "Don't tell me to sit down," I said. I was aware of how I sounded, sharp, practical, but also how necessary the sharpness was to keep the room from folding into excuses. Sophie watched her fingers pressed to the underside of the table, so I could see the trimmer of her knuckles. "I didn't," Mark began. His sentences came clipped. Sophie cut in, "You put the letters under the fruit bowl this morning, Mark. I saw you with the envelope. You put a key in there too. I checked your coat when you left." Her voice was small but firm. "Why?" Mark's jaw worked. He looked at Sophie, then at me. "Sophie, he started, and the line stopped. He ran a hand along his jaw, the scar at the edge catching the kitchen light. "Mark," I said, keeping my voice measured so each word landed. "Tell us why there's a second ring and why our house was photographed." The photograph lay between us like a third person demanding explanation. For a moment Mark only breathed. Then he said, "Anna, I stayed because I thought routine was what we both wanted. I thought if I kept the house, kept the bills paid, kept things smooth, everything would be fine. You didn't want trouble, so you hid parts of our life. Sophie, you didn't want us to know." Her words were punctured by hurt. Mark looked at Sophie and then at me. He sunk his weight onto the nearest chair. "I never meant to hurt you, Anna." I didn't know how to say. I interrupted him before he could find a softer grammar. "Find how to say what, Mark? That you put another ring in the shed because you met someone else?" My mouth tasted bitter. "Tell me the truth." Mark's shoulders dropped as if a weight had been taken off and then pressed back on. "Yes," he said finally. "I met someone. I didn't plan it. It started as something I could control. I thought I could keep both lives separate. I thought I could keep us intact." His voice was low and uneven. The room shifted. Anger came in waves and then receded into a cold, precise calculation. My hands went to my bag by reflex. I thought of years of small compromises, of mornings where he answered in sentences that cut intimacy into neat, dull pieces. Suspicion had led me here. Now betrayal stepped forward with a name. "Who is she?" "Sophie," and the question was direct as a blade. Mark swallowed. "Her name is Claire," he said. He looked at me in a way I had not seen in years, open, guilty, exhausted. "She's a woman from work." I told myself it was a friendship. It wasn't. I paid her so that she would go away when I needed her to. I made payments. I took pictures. I did it to manage a life I thought I could fix without talking. He looked at Sophie. "Sophie, I'm sorry." Sophie stood straighter and set her jaw. She had the look of someone deciding which rule she would break and which she would enforce. "How long?" she asked. Mark's answer came in small words. "About a year." He looked at me for permission to keep talking. I offered none. Anger rose in me again, hotter and less useful than the first. I reached for the second band and set it on the table so the two rings lay side by side. Their metal glinted in the kitchen light. I felt exposed, as if each object were a sentence I had not been allowed to read. "Why would you hide counseling?" I asked. "You cancelled an appointment and didn't tell me. Why did you think decisions like that were yours alone?" Mark's throat moved. "I thought if I fixed things, if I kept the house steady, then one day we would be back to how things were. I know I was wrong. I should have told you." I was afraid of losing what we had. Sophie stood and paced, the action small but restless. "I don't want to keep doing what you want, Mark," she said. "I won't let our life repeat this pattern." Her voice had grown colder than I had heard it. A new sound interrupted us, my phone vibrating on the counter. I ignored it and focused on the papers Sophie had handed me earlier. One of the receipts showed an address. A storage unit a few miles from town. The dates lined up with photographs and payments. I looked up at Mark. "What is in the storage?" I asked. Mark's face went slack. "Nothing for you to see, Anna. I only stored some old tools and boxes." "I never thought you'd look." Sophie slammed her palm on the table. The sound echoed through the kitchen. "Mark," she said, and there were 3 quick lines of dialogue that came out like a pattern. "Don't lie. We deserve better answers. Where did you take our photos?" Mark tried to answer, and for a stretch we had a rapid exchange where each of us pushed and tested. "I didn't mean for you to find out like this," he said. "I didn't want you hurt. You hurt us by deciding what we'd be kept from." I shot back. "You made the choice without us, Sophie. You took our house and our life and hid pieces of it." It was a quick volley, 3 to 6 lines, and the room felt like it was being measured anew. Then Mark did something I had not expected. He stood, walked to the back door, and said, "I can take you to the storage. I can show you everything." His voice carried a new tone, bargaining maybe, or a need to be seen. The offer hung in the air like a seized opportunity. Sophie looked at me. "Do we go?" she asked. I remembered the photograph of our living room. I thought of the bedroom drawer with the missing ring, of the smear on the bathroom mirror the night I first felt that something had shifted. I said, "Yes." "Show us now." We went in the van with the engine still warm. The town lights cut across the windows. It felt like moving through a shallow, ordered field. Mark drove with a set jaw. The storage place was a rectangle of metal doors and fluorescent light. Mark pulled the key from his pocket and unlocked Unit 23. Inside the unit were boxes, a workbench, and a camera bag. He lifted a cardboard box and brought out more photographs. More interior shots of our house at different times. A picture of me in the kitchen taken from a doorway I hadn't noticed. A shot of Sophie on the couch the day she had a fever last winter. The photos were dated and labeled in Mark's handwriting. My breath came quick in the small, dry air of the storage unit. "Why did you take these?" I asked. Mark looked at the pile and then at me. "Control, I guess. I wanted a sense that I could keep something unchanged. I thought if I could capture moments, I could stop losing them." He rubbed his forehead. "I thought if I photographed our life, I could pause it." I realized now it was wrong. Sophie moved closer to the stack and found a small notebook. It contained notes. Dates, payments, short lines about meetings, a name, Clinic X, cancelled appointments. Sophie read a line aloud. "Meeting cancelled. Told Anna it was minor leak." She looked up at Mark. "You lied about the small things to hide the large ones." For a long moment there was only the hum of the fluorescent light. I felt the anger shift into something colder, clearer. Betrayal had a motive and a method. Knowing the method changed the shape of what I could do. I could stand here and pass excuses, or I could act. "I'm leaving tonight," I said. My voice had the steady cadence of someone who has formed a plan. The words felt final, not flaming. "I'm packing a bag. I will leave the house. I won't make a scene. I will be back for Sophie if she chooses to stay." Mark stared at me, face paling. "Anna, you can't." He stepped forward and nearly reached for my arm. "Don't touch me, Mark," I said. My hand met his before we could both move, and the contact felt like the end of conversation. "Not now. Not like this." Sophie put a hand on my shoulder. "Mom," she began. I turned to her. "Sophie, if you want to come with me, we'll leave now. If you want to stay, I will respect that. But I am not staying in a house where parts of our life are kept from me." My voice tightened but did not snap. Sophie looked at Mark, then at me. Her face arranged itself into decision. "I'm not sure yet," she said. I need time to think. I won't go with you without thinking. The honest, small admission had weight in it. Mark dropped his head into his hands. Anna, please don't go. I can change. I can. He began to list the practical things he would do. Counseling rescheduled, payments stopped, measures to make the house open again. The bargaining began in earnest. Mark named doctors, gave dates, offered time, and promised to stop the transfers. He spoke quickly, and in a rush he made the same offers he had made in the past, when a new problem had come up. Fix the roof, fix the car, fix the dinner schedule. But this time his offers were met with a different response from Sophie and me. We're not buying patchwork, Mark. Sophie, we want truth. Mark tried to answer with words that were familiar, practical promises and timetables. But I had learned that his practical competence had been a substitute for saying what mattered. There was a break in our exchange when Sophie pulled a small packet of stamped documents from her bag. She slid them across the table to Mark. You kept receipts for payments to Claire's account and for a storage unit, she said simply. You kept a photograph of me from the sofa under your bed. You made decisions for me. Mark touched the papers with 2 fingers and then folded his hands. I was scared of losing you both. I thought I could protect us by managing the mess myself. I know that's not protection. I know it looks like betrayal. There was a brief silence. I felt the emotion inside me change again. Suspicion to anger to a hard resolve. The resolve did not feel triumphant. It felt necessary. I walked to the van in the storage yard and opened the rear. I put 3 small bags into the trunk, clothes, a pair of shoes, Sophie's favorite mug tucked into a towel. Sophie followed me out, her steps measured. She leaned into the van for a moment and then straightened. Mom, whatever you do, don't erase me from both sides, she said. Her voice shook. If I go with you, don't ask me to drop Sophie. If I stay, don't make me choose because of your anger. I closed the van and looked at Mark one last time. He stood beneath the sodium light, his silhouette, the man I had married and the man who had made choices without me. Anna, I'm sorry. I will do the counseling. I will stop the payments. I will show you everything. He stepped forward and then held back, as if he did not trust his body to stay still. I picked up my small bag and shouldered it. The movement felt decisive. I did not dramatize it. I did not slam doors. I placed my hand on Sophie's shoulder and said, I need to leave tonight. I cannot sleep in a house that keeps secrets. I will come back for Sophie if she asks me to. I will not ask her to choose now. My words were short and plain. Sophie nodded. She risked a small smile at me that had a dimple I had seen since she was small. Mark's face crumpled. He stepped in front of the van and tried one last time. Anna, please, he said. Mark, I said, and the single name stopped him. I moved around the van and walked down the driveway. The morning sky had not broken yet. There was a grey seam at the edge of the houses. I left the second ring and my own band on the kitchen table. The metals sat together amid the receipts and the photograph. Sophie watched from the doorway as I closed the gate. She held the brass key in her hand. Her eyes were bright and raw. She called after me, Mom. I stopped on the sidewalk and turned. Sophie, I said, I will be back when you tell me to come. My voice did not promise change. It promised presence on my own terms. She nodded and stepped back into the house. The front door closed with a small, ordinary click. I walked away with the small bag over my shoulder and a steady step. The house receded behind me into something I had known for a long time but had never seen in full. The next hours were quiet and concrete. I found a cheap room at a motel and paid cash. I made a list on the motel stationery. Find a lawyer, call a counselor for myself, set up a bank account. I wrote down concrete things because decisions must be made in action, not in slogans. I lit the small lamp beside the bed and folded my hands in my lap as if to see what they would do next. At dawn, I walked back to the house. The front steps were cold under my shoes. I put the small bag on the polished table and reached for the 2 rings. For a long moment I let my fingers rest on the metal. Then I set my wedding band down in the center of the table and walked away. The band sat there against the maple surface and caught the early light. It did not sparkle in some fated way. It simply reflected, plain and honest. Sophie stood in the doorway as I left. She held the brass key in one hand and the photograph in the other. She did not run to me. She watched me walk to the street and then turn to the house. The house was the same house with the same couch and the same lamp. The choices inside it had changed everything. When I reached the corner, I did not look back more than once. I kept my eyes forward and my breathing steady. I did not make promises about how this would end because the end was not mine to decide alone. My action, leaving the ring on the table, was not a speech. It was a decision I could see and measure. I would no longer live inside a life that was arranged without me. The ring on the table was a concrete fact that everyone in the house could touch and read. By the time the sun rose fully, Mark had begun to call and text. He left messages listing counseling centers and asking for a meeting. He sent a photograph of a cancelled transfer with evidence that payments had stopped. Sophie sent a short text. "I'm okay. I need time." I read the messages and did not answer immediately. I held the phone and felt my pulse even out. The play of bargaining began at once, and I watched it from a distance. That afternoon I packed the small bag again more carefully. I scheduled a counselor for myself and made an appointment with a lawyer. I allowed myself one private thought, that ending a life together did not have to end respect. I did not say it out loud. I acted in ways that would make future conversations possible. Actions, not slogans. The final scene of the chapter is a small, precise image. My wedding band set in a neat circle on the kitchen table beside the second ring, and the photograph, a map of choices laid flat. The ring sat on top of receipts and a cancelled counseling notice. Sophie stood in the doorway and looked at the table, her expression a mix of grief and relief. Mark sat on the kitchen chair with his head in his hands. I turned away and walked down the path toward a bus stop. My steps were measured. I held the small bag closer and kept my hands away from the phone. The life inside the house had been split open, its parts rearranged. I did not know if we would heal or if we would separate forever. I knew only that I had made one clear choice. The chapter closes on a concrete action. I walked toward the bus stop with a single small bag. And behind me in the kitchen the wedding band lies on the table between two other objects that finally force answer and change. The window of the house catches light on the photograph where Sophie sits on the couch, and a bird lands on the fence outside, pecking once at the wood. That small, ordinary sound is the last thing I register before the bus pulls up and I step aboard.